Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Lightman. I'm Executive Director of Metro21 Smart Cities Institute, and this is our kickoff for the 2021-22 academic year here at Carnegie Mellon. We are not with you in person. We're actually going to have a hybrid event next week, so I might be able to see some of you in person, 50 of you, 49 of you. But today we're doing hybrid, and we're so thrilled to have our friends and colleagues at Fourth Economy. And I'm just going to do a quick little.
Karen, you're muted.
Oh, you can vault. Okay, thank you. I know, I heard something. It was that. Thank you, Jerry. So the 21 in our name stands for 21st Century Solutions. So the idea is we take the expertise of Carnegie Mellon, our faculty, we're at 7 colleges plus the libraries. There's a lot of real world problems. We play in that sweet spot where we take the expertise and interest of faculty and match that with solving real world problems in time-bound and transparent pilot projects with municipal and equity partners. We have about 20 active projects. Sometimes that fluctuates to more, sometimes less. We've probably deployed by now close to 100 projects since our founding in 2015. So with that, I am so thrilled to kick this off to the team at Fourth Economy. And we really encourage you in the audience to participate. So I'm going to be mining and looking at the chat. So if you have questions, type them in the chat. And then they have a pretty decent sized presentation, but maybe 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to go to Q&A. We can keep the conversation going. We have to the top of the hour. And so with that, Jerry, the floor is yours.
Okay.
You can take over slides too.
Okay. So share my screen. Okay, is it showing for everyone now? Okay. So we have most of the members of our analytics team here. I'm the Vice President of Research and Analytics at Fourth Economy. Fourth Economy is based here in Pittsburgh, but now since COVID, we have folks all over the place. And we have almost all of our analytics team here. Mickey McGlasson is not able to make it. He is one of several Heinz alums that is working for us. I am a Heinz affiliate, not a Heinz alum. Karen and I actually worked together many years ago at the Center for Economic Development. And I've taught some classes off and on at Heinz over the past really 20 years. Then I'm going to flip it to our newest staff member, Mara, to introduce herself.
I was going to say good morning, but good afternoon, everyone. Assuming everyone's in the same place. Mara Kay. I am the newest member of the analytics team, junior analyst. We'll probably get into what that looks like throughout this presentation, but I am a proud MSPPM alum. I graduated in May, so fresh. So I got to work with Jerry for my systems project, which I'm sure everyone is very familiar with those, and that's how I got connected with Fourth Economy and sort of the type of work that they do in market analysis, and can speak to a lot of the connections between Heinz and Fourth Economy as well. Should I bump it to Chris next?
Yeah, hi, Chris Worley. I'm a MISM alum from December of 2017, and after graduating Heinz, since then I've been working with Fourth Economy and on Jerry's team, doing analytical work. So thank you for having us, and happy to answer any questions about what our day-to-day looks like, questions about projects and everything. I've got my son is homesick today. This is Owen. He joined us in Pittsburgh, and since then we've moved to Kansas, and I'm working remotely. While I was at Heinz, I was the director of the Students Using Data for Social Good group, SUDS. And we've done a lot of work with Karen's group, and including, sharing interns back and forth, projects back and forth, and all that kind of thing. So it's been a great partnership, and it continues with work at Fourth Economy. So thanks for having us. I think, Megan, you're still to go.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Nestor. I'm a strategist on Fourth Economy's team. I'm the odd woman out on the analytics team because I have no Heinz affiliation. I'm a proud graduate of the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. And we have lots of fun conversations about that during our staff meetings. I have been at Fourth Economy for about 2 years, and my kind of past the 10 years before that, I was working in the nonprofit sector on with youth on college and career access. So I sort of have brought an education-focused lens to some of the work that I do, and we'll see a couple examples of those projects. But really happy to be chatting with you all, and thanks for having us. I think that's it for our team, right?
Yeah. So did that advance 2 slides? Yep, I think it did. So Fourth Economy, there's like 3 main pillars of things we do. We do work with organizations. We do a lot of strategic planning to make them more impactful. So strategic plans, business plans, but we also help with some program creation and program evaluation. And I think we have at least one example of that. But a lot of our work is really around how do we create great communities and strong economies. So we may be working on a comprehensive economic development strategy. We may be working on a community's comprehensive plan, or it may be something more focused around an innovation strategy, or doing something very specific around looking at affordable housing. So these are some of the things, we've been very heavily engaged in a lot of the economic recovery and resilience work that is happening right now. And a lot of that has spun out of some work that Chris and Mickey started right when COVID hit and the governor's orders came out closing certain businesses. And then we spun that into a bunch of other work that Megan has been doing around childcare in the economy. So right now we have done a number of these engagements really around helping communities with the American Rescue Plan funding, both looking at what is the COVID impact. And a lot of our early work was helping people estimate what that impact might be in their communities. But now it's really shifted more towards how do they deploy that money? What is the strategies they use to help their economies get back on track? Now, one of the things about Fourth Economy that we've always emphasized, analysis has always been very core to what we do. We try to ground our work in rigorous data analysis, but we also put a heavy emphasis on the visualization and the communication of that. And that's something we've always emphasized. So we've had designers that work with staff, but we also have amongst our analysts, a lot of people with a lot of design and visualization skills, myself excluded. But any of the other folks on that list, Mara, Megan, Mickey, and Chris, all have design and visualization skills. So I often joke if you see something coming out of Fourth Economy that looks a little like it's a straight Excel chart or a straight Google Sheet chart, I did it, but if it looks like anything like this, one of the other folks did it. But it's always been important to us that the work we do, while it's rigorous, is communicated in a way that people can understand it. You will see very little of our work that ever throws out, oh, here's a beta coefficient, or we did a sensitivity analysis on the 3 cohorts of the, classifications of, we try to minimize that technical language and make sure it's something to communicate. Most of our work is digested by the public and public officials. If we do have to provide anything technical, there may be a technical memo or appendix, but most of it is really kept to this digestible level. So we're going to dive into some examples because I think it's a good way to see how this worked, and on each of these different people worked on it. So Chris, if you're able to, if Owen allows you to, you can describe what you were doing here.
So one of the things that we've done, especially since COVID has impacted nearly every industry and occupation across the US, is looked at this giant shift to remote work. It's something early on in the pandemic that we were trying to figure out. Jerry mentioned those governor's orders earlier. What businesses were closed down, what workers were considered essential workers, and then on top of that, what workers may be impacted in different ways because they're either able to shift to remote work or not able to shift to remote work. And even if you are able to shift to remote work, childcare may be an issue for you, like those types of impacts. So one of the things that we did early on was look at data from across the country, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and map that. Here, we've done a bunch of follow-on work with that in terms of what makes a place a remote worker hub. So like what have places invested in quality of life amenities that remote workers may want in terms of like a talent attraction effort. We've also looked at shifts in commuting patterns because of remote work. So I don't know if we have a slide in here for that, but happy to talk more about that. Some of this work has been featured on a census presentation, and we can provide links to that following the presentation if folks are interested. But one of the things that's great about Fourth Economy is our work is relevant, it's useful, it's kind of deals with emerging trends, and this is just an example of that.
Chris, this is you again.
We're lucky that Owen's letting me do this. So another thing that we did was a project where we were approached by the foundation community to look at how the region is going to change over time. And to inform that work, they were trying to get a better sense of population projections. So what counties and regions were projected to grow or decline, how to manage that growth and decline. We know that population and shifts in demographics has a big impact on scale and type of services that may need to be provided. For instance, with an aging population, services needed there, the housing needed there might look a lot different than in a region that has a younger population that's growing like gangbusters and that sort of thing. So Jerry, you can help me talk through some of this stuff, but the region around Pittsburgh has historically declined, and this is the work that we did to put together, to put a population model together for the counties throughout the US and in this particular region. A lot of projections that we found going into this project were statewide numbers, but didn't really help us in determining, what county by county look might look like. So we created a cohort component method for estimating populations going into the future. I don't know, Jerry, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, in some of the cases, we're working in a specific community, but in the way that the census or the BLS or some of the other sources serve the data, oftentimes it's just as easy to get all of the counties or to get all of the areas at once. And if you're building a model, you can run all the data through that model. So in a lot of cases, we start out looking at a pretty narrow question that we then say, well, if we're going to look at this, we can actually do it for all the communities, and then we can use this in our other projects. Doesn't happen with every piece of work or analysis, but in quite a few, we do that. And then this is also just an example. This is that same work, but different ways in which to visualize that story. The first one seeing it on a map, but here getting to see it in a more conceptual map of which are the counties that are driving the growth and decline in the region. And this is really helping us to see how those growth engines are underpowered and overwhelmed by all of the counties that are losing population. And it is not surprising that we're boring Owen to sleep. But lunchtime is often the ideal time to talk economics and put somebody to sleep. So, Chris, I'll keep going on this one, and then you can, because Owen's asleep, and I'm going to minimize your impact on his sleeping. And Megan, you can jump in here as you will. So early in the COVID, as we were looking at the closure orders, and then also looking at that remote work, who are the workers who can work remotely, but also looking at who fall into a category of vulnerability, either because of their pay rates or other aspects of their job. And so we started looking at categorizing the jobs in a region or in a community based on their vulnerability. And in the Pittsburgh region, one of the things we found is that half of the workers were economically vulnerable, either based on the fact of how much they earned and or their ability to work remotely, or the sectors they were in being impacted by closure orders.
And Jerry, I'll just add on that last slide too, that was probably one of the most interesting pieces of analysis I've done ever, but also at Fourth Economy. It was largely driven by Mickey and Chris, but they're combining census PUMS data and data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and occupation and industry data, and lots of different data sets in a really interesting way to kind of come to this conclusion. So it was one of my, I think one of the more interesting things that I've been able to work on. So speaking of Owen, as Jerry said, I've been doing a lot of work on childcare and sort of the impacts of childcare on the economy, right? And how it allows for folks to enter the labor force. It's good for kids, it's good for families, it's good for the businesses and the workers, but perhaps most relevant during the pandemic, it allows folks to work productively. So this is just I did this model in a couple of different locations for them, but kind of looking at how much capacity for childcare there is in a region. So here in Pittsburgh, you can see or in the MSA, there's 45,000 kids under 5 who need childcare. So I looked at the number of kids who have all parents in the workforce, and then 36,000 is the number of licensed childcare spots. So that's like a pre-COVID stat, and then the bar on the right was kind of breaking down where childcare was struggling and where and why spots were being lost during the pandemic, to kind of show like we have a real shortage of childcare.
And this doesn't even account for the shortage that existed, even considering the pre-COVID. There were still not necessarily enough available seats, but this is just looking at the immediate COVID impacts.
Yeah, and then which relates directly to labor force participation, most frequently, though not exclusively, women's labor force participation. So often I'll be following up slides and analysis on childcare with statistics on women and work. So this is just kind of looking at pretty basic BLS data, but kind of showing the rise and fall of labor force participation and how big that drop has been since the start of the pandemic.
And the pandemic has really started opening more communities to conversations about things that they were never really interested or willing to talk about. That being the role of childcare, that being really women's labor force participation. It's not necessarily easy or accepted in every community we're working in, but we've seen more and more communities at least starting to take a look at that.
And Jerry, just to add on that point, in regions especially that are interested in talent attraction efforts, if you have a pre-existing lack of childcare capacity in your region, we just had this come up on a project, you need to address that gap and address the gap for the workforce that you're trying to attract as well. So just, you know, regions are getting smart about that now.
And then just briefly,
oh, sorry, Jerry. Is it okay if I address this question? Because I think it's a good one.
Megan, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, let's talk about, this is a big deal. So let's hold here.
The question was, are there other aspects you suspect contributed to the decline in women activity in the labor force besides childcare? Yes. One is that women are more concentrated in jobs that were likely to be impacted by the pandemic in different ways. So women are more likely to be in healthcare, women are more likely to be in many service industry jobs. And so that might be another, there's a hypothesis that might be another reason why women are exiting the labor force, is because they're, you know, they don't want their health to be at risk. They don't want to risk bringing illness back to family, or that they're, you know, not willing to put up with the low wages of that work during a global pandemic. So that's one other potential reason. Yeah, I'm sure there are more. Jerry or Chris or Maura, jump in if I'm not thinking of something or not mentioning something else we've talked about.
I think you covered it.
Great question, though.
And there's a lot more analysis that Megan has done around these issues than we're showing here, but I was just trying to kind of have one slide indicative of each.
Yeah, and one important thing, sorry, Jerry, but one thing too that slide doesn't really cover, other than like a little sentence at the end, is that you know, we saw at the beginning of the pandemic large numbers of women exit the labor force. And since then, white women's labor force participation has actually come closer to recovery than Black and Latina women. So that's something that, you know, isn't even, we've dug into it more in other places, but not on this chart. But something I like to remind our viewers whenever I'm presenting this data is that the impacts are even more severe for women of color.
And sometimes it's difficult to get, you know, in a lot of communities, they want to have this more recent data to see what's happening immediately. And in a lot of cases, like on the unemployment data, we don't have the demographics at the geography level and racially disaggregated and by gender to be able to say with much specificity about what's happening. You have that trade-off between you get more detail and more recent at the national level. You know, you start to get some less detail as you drill down. So in some cases, it's been tough to look at some of these questions. And in some cases, you know, we're really running into the limits of how the data is collected. The questions that people are asking, we are not always able to answer them the way they would like them to be answered. And a good case in point for that is our work in Ramsey County. So Ramsey County is in Minnesota, and it's St. Paul is the major city there. We were doing this work on an economic competitiveness and inclusion plan during the period in which George Floyd was murdered, which, while it was both timely and relevant to our work, it also significantly disrupted the work, as well as the COVID pandemic. But that work was recently released. And this was a case where there was a really good engaged client who was asking a lot of good questions. And in some cases, you know, we weren't able to, the data just didn't exist to answer those questions at, you know, about the racial and ethnic disaggregations that they were interested in, whether it was related to business ownership or business creation or the recency of unemployment impacts. And that's been an ongoing challenge in a lot of the data work that we do, is either people want to know about a very specific sector or about a more specific population. And one of the issues in Ramsey was just the differences within the Asian population. And some of the data just didn't let you look at the different ethnic subgroups that are categorized under Asian. That was just a limit of the data. We also did this work in Georgia, a strategic plan and 5-year vision. One of the interesting issues and divisions in Macon was really, and you know, it says one Macon, but the reality is there's sort of two Macons, and it literally is one of those, this side of the tracks, the other side of the tracks, the white side and the black side of the community. And we did a lot of work to bring some of those elements together. Chris, that you worked on that one, is that correct, or is that Mickey?
Mickey was a primary on it, but something that was really neat about this project is the community engagement aspect of the project. There was an ongoing sort of event series called On the Table, where folks would come together, break bread together, share a meal, and talk about ideas. And so that's the other side of our work. A lot of times, this group that's on the phone right now with you all will kind of produce the analysis that talks about the size and scale and specificity of the problems. But there's another part of our work that engages with community that says, hey, we have articulated what we think is the size, scale, and specific problems. Let's work together. First of all, are those the right things? And if so, let's work together to find solutions to those problems.
That's a great point, Chris. I often forget about the engagement side of the house. York County, this was another example of those recovery plans and resilience strategies that we were working on. And we've had an interesting dynamic in York between the city of York, which has been struggling for a long time, and the surrounding county, and trying to figure out how to help both of those work together. And on the success side, however, you know, as the dollars were coming through for recovery, our work directly helped inform that and help them program and plan out millions of dollars to go into the community. I'm just going to roll through these last couple quickly so we can get to the other Q&A. Here's one example of a program evaluation. The EDA ran a program called the Regional Innovation Strategies Program. They've now rebranded it the Build to Scale program. I'm not sure how I feel about the rebranding. I'm not sure what that connotates. And our recommendation was not to rebrand the program. However, we did recommend some changes in how they do the program with the pre-application process. This program has been it's a national program. Communities around the country apply to get support to help build the regional innovation ecosystem and help spread that activity around the country. So we looked at all of that to see how that program is performing and whether or not it should be continued. So we're happy to see that the program has continued and did get renewed through a difficult budget fight. Here, this project on the Nature Conservancy is some of the work we do also has a little more of a climate focus. It's another aspect of the resiliency. This is another one that Chris has worked on, but as Owen is sleeping, I'll wait to see if you're going to jump in. In this project, we worked with another consulting firm that did public polling. So one aspect they did was a public poll to get input from Indiana residents about renewable energy and what are the kinds of policies that they would support. We then took that input and modeled how could the state of Indiana get to the goals set by the Nature Conservancy for carbon reduction and for renewable energy. One of the things we got very lucky in is that the policies that the residents supported were sufficient for the state to achieve those goals. But we also had to look at some other interesting elements about the capacity of the energy infrastructure to handle that transition to renewable energy. And then we did a lot of work around communicating what those changes meant. What did it mean for landowners? What did it mean in terms of health impacts? What did it mean in terms of other ways in which it would impact the state of Indiana?
This by far is one of my favorite projects. Anytime that we can do an economic analysis that kind of communicates that triple bottom line impact of profit, planet, and people, it's a lot of fun to work on these types of projects. Just mentioning offhand, we've also worked with the Sustainable Business Network of Philadelphia to look at the stormwater industry, specifically the green stormwater industry in that place, and have also worked with a few utilities to do some economic modeling for them as well. But this is a really cool part of our portfolio, one that I want to especially push in our overall workload.
And then we have a bunch of interactive work, which I'm not going to click into these examples. Karen is going to provide you all with the PDF, and the links should work. I did not test them. I just realized as I'm saying that. So if they don't work, I'll get back to you with links that do work. A couple of these, but just to describe them, a couple of these are dashboards. The AARP Maine and Columbus Vibrant Connected are our shiny apps that are done as dashboards. And then we have a number of things that are done as like Tableau story maps. That's the electric vehicles. We did that project for Duquesne Light. There's legislation in front of PA to increase the electrification of vehicles. And so this was to educate legislators about what that meant for their community. And another Tableau story map was the future of education in Beaver County, PA, looking at projections, again, using our population projection model, but then also looking at school enrollment projections, and what it would mean if Beaver County kept its 14 different school districts. And then another different one here, but also interactive, the economic development map, sort of an economic development inventory asset map of resources in Northwest Michigan. And it's a Kumu map, which if any folks have ever seen those, it makes really nice kind of interactive ecosystem maps. And that's it. So we'll stop sharing and open for questions.
This is fantastic. I've had the pleasure of knowing Jerry for a long time when we were children. And so I've seen the progress and development of Fourth Economy, and you have an amazing team and you're doing great work. And I'm really honored to have you here with us. Given that a lot of our audience is students at Heinz College, I would love for you guys to share a little bit more about kind of what brought you to Fourth Economy, what brought you to this field. And Chris, I'm going to pick on you first, I think, because I think Owen is still sleeping. If you don't mind muting and sharing your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would love to. So my route to Heinz College is probably one that's shared by a lot of folks. I got out of undergrad, had an environmental studies degree, which is kind of a great liberal arts background. I did a year of AmeriCorps, and in that year of AmeriCorps, I learned that I wanted to pair sort of a service-oriented approach with helping that through data and technology. I spoke to some Heinz folks. It seemed like a great fit. And then I ran into Justin Cole, who was the first director of the SUDS group that I mentioned earlier. And through SUDS got kind of this big lens into what was the landscape of folks doing interesting stuff with data across the Pittsburgh region. And Fourth Economy was one of those organizations. I was fortunate enough to apply for a position as I was graduating to get in, but it really was sort of the values of Fourth Economy that drew me to the organization, and sort of the continuation of the conversations that started at Heinz, and some of the impact work that that Fourth Economy put out. I could see that from the blog posts. I could see that from the Fourth Economy Community Index, which in that time was just sort of in its infancy, and we built some of that out. We can talk more about that. But really the way that Fourth Economy approached the work squared a lot with the way that especially some of my friends in the data analytics track were thinking about public policy and data, and using data-informed decision-making to make communities stronger, make economies stronger, make the world a better place.
Anyone else from the team want to share? Jerry?
No, I was just gonna say, go ahead. You guys follow that one.
I'll jump in as the what I think is one of the other big Heinz stories, which is I was a sort of a non-mathy kid before Heinz, and was converted. My family's from the region, so I was always very interested in economic development. But so in my undergrad, I pursued it sort of in the narrative, community engagement aspect, which was great, but I kind of hit a point where I realized that I didn't know how to do math in a meaningful way, in a way that was going to be able to sort of advance the ball, or where I would be what I would consider an asset to communities, or could bring something to the table. So I too did a service year. I worked for some nonprofits, came to Heinz for the data focus, really, strapped down to focus on that for 2 years, to be able to pair the qualitative with pair the new quantitative skills with the existing qualitative. For that marriage, it's really important to me that those are balanced. That's sort of one of my guiding principles, because I think you can crunch numbers till the cows come home, but if you can't also communicate what those mean, then all you have is a spreadsheet. So both of those things was what made Heinz a really good fit for me. And then I was really interested in Fourth Economy coming out of Heinz. I had done sort of the work for the city. I had done nonprofit work. I worked for a lot of firms that bid out projects, and I wanted to be one of the ones doing those projects. I really wanted to dig my nails into the analysis itself, and sort of be able to, again, balance that research side with community engagement. That is sort of the corner I wanted to be at. And so that's what we do.
I guess I can I don't know if my story is as interesting as Chris Amara's, but when I was leaving my policy program, I was interested, I kind of cast a wide net in terms of organizations I was looking to work with and for. And I really just knew I wanted to kind of support communities in tackling these really hairy problems, and especially think about how families are impacted by the economy and and other things happening in the world. So not even necessarily, I wasn't necessarily focused on economic development particularly, but I wanted to look at some of these hairy problems and work with really interesting, smart, kind, funny people. So both of those things came together very beautifully at Fourth Economy for me.
So we had a question come in Does Fourth Economy work on policy development and implementation, or mostly advising and analysis? I would definitely say, I mean, the majority of our work is on the latter. We do, in a lot of cases, we have policy recommendations, but we're usually not creating those out of whole cloth. It's looking at what other communities are doing. Here are affordable housing development policies, or here's some other policies around promoting affordable housing that could help in your community. What we have done from time to time in different cases, we have done more program development. In our very earliest days, Fourth Economy helped create and launch the Green Building Products Initiative for the Green Building Alliance. And it was actually a green building product development grant program where we helped them get money from the foundations. And we started that program. We actually staffed it until they hired Aurora Sherrard to run that program. And then Aurora eventually became the executive director. We also created a program for the state of Rhode Island. It's called Steam Engine USA, that brought together the design expertise of RISD with Brown University. RISD is the Rhode Island School of Design, Brown, and working with the shipbuilding industry and the other sort of manufacturing in the community to bring together the design and manufacturing capabilities in the state. And we operated that for a few years until the Rhode Island MEP Polaris took the program over and had the staff capacity. Rhode Island is about the size of the Pittsburgh MSA. So we did staff that and run that. And we have for some number of years been staffing Connect Greater Newport. So it is an economic development arm of the Newport Chamber of Commerce. And we've been providing various functions for them. I'm not sure how many years that's been going on now. Is it 3 or 4?
Too many. just kidding. It's a wonderful project. I love being a part of it.
We do those from time to time, but they're not a, it's just sort of, they come up on occasion. Most of the work is driven by RFPs that we respond to, that is asking for a strategy, a plan, or something along those lines.
That's a good, I don't know if you just magically transitioned us there, Jerry, or saw the next question, which was how we get connected to the clients and communities we work with. So sometimes, oftentimes, yes, RFPs, communities are putting out requests. They're trying to find consultants like us to come in and work with them. So we apply. Sometimes a lot of times if we're already have been working in the community, then they have something else come up. They'll reach out to us, and kind of, so like a soft lead, right? Like, will you apply for this? We want you to come work with us. And then sometimes it's other personal, professional connections that gets us kind of hooked up with work. So some of the childcare stuff we've been doing, for example, came through like just personal, professional connections of mine that knew like, oh, Megan does childcare. Oh, Megan works at Fourth Economy. Will Fourth Economy do some childcare work for us? So a combination of ways we get work.
Looks like the chat is heating up. I think the next question, I love it, is about internships. And I would add also, employment opportunities, if you can speak to those two.
Well, maybe, Will, you should answer that question yourself, if you'd like to.
I can do that. I can answer that. So Fourth Economy, it was a rather, I know the answer to this question. Fourth Economy does have a wonderful internship program. So as far as I believe, if it's still the same as when I was there a few months ago, they have a program that is research for research analysts and one for data analysts. And data analysts, is that position still open?
We're right in the middle of final round interviews. So
excellent. Great. Yeah, so that program will work more with Mara and Jerry to help compile data, help compile census data, and start to create the steps to analyzing all of that. And then the research analyst, which was my position, is a role that basically it covers a lot of different areas, one of them being gathering research, meaningful research for different client work, right, as the name implies. So that would be looking at other policies in different states that Fourth Economy can model their own analysis work after. Some of that might even just be trying to get a pulse on what's going on right now regarding, say, childcare, right, or regarding different issues that affect Fourth Economy's work. So highly recommend the program for anybody interested. I learned so much. It really is, the data team here really are fantastic people, super great people to know and learn from. And yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Thanks, Will. And thanks for letting me put you on the spot. We're right in the midst of final round hiring for the fall interns, but if you check back on our website or email me, we will potentially be hiring for a round of spring interns and summer interns as well. So
there was another question about the employment opportunities in general. I mean, you know, we're a consulting business. It's kind of it's almost like a rolling admissions type of, situation. As work comes in, all of a sudden we need to add capacity, so we're constantly posting things. As all this EDA money is coming out on the street, there's a lot of work that's happening. And we're always evaluating when we need to add capacity. There was a question here about when the data isn't disaggregated. That's where we sometimes have to get a little creative. We try to answer the question as best we can with the data that's on hand. And we try to say is like, well, look, you want to know about, and the other struggle we sometimes have here is there's different terminology that is used in community to community, and sometimes there's different terminology used in the data. So when we're talking about business ownership, a lot of the data is put out and it publishes minority business ownership. And it'll report things minority, non-minority, and then it may have some of it more disaggregated. So there's always a tension between, are we using a terminology that might be a little outdated, but it reflects the data that we're getting, or do we use a terminology that's in the community? So in some cases, we might be forced to look at something that's a different category. How does overall minority business ownership compare? Is it higher or lower? So, then we think, is it really going to be that much different for this more disaggregated group? Or we try to find some other statistics that can inform that conversation, that may be from the state level, or it may be from a different level, or there was some other research that was done. In some cases, you can also get to the more granular data and look at data on direct businesses, or you can start to find maybe some administrative or other sources in the community. But in a lot of cases, it's just, you try and see if there's a creative solution to it, and you just answer the question as best you can with whatever level of uncertainty is left.
No, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, as a follow-up to that, sometimes a recommendation for a client that might need that information is, and this has been true in New York for their business ownership stuff, is for them to survey the real businesses in their business district to get that information, because nobody else collects it, for instance. So that might be a follow-up recommendation if that information is really needed.
I was wondering, Mara, if you wanted to say anything about, like, for lack of a better word, the fad of disaggregated data as well, and kind of what we've been talking about here internally.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's very timely for us. We've noticed that the term disaggregating or disaggregated has sort of taken off in not only our sphere, but sort of the greater economic development sphere, but it's being used pretty liberally and used without without an adjective or without a sort of direction. It's just a general term, really, and so it needs to come with like a specific action. And so as part of our team's commitment to equity, we're reevaluating how we even go about this process and being really explicit in, well, disaggregating for what, or disaggregating for who, what is the question. So we, our team has been talking about equity more largely, or we always have to be, because we're working in communities, we're outsiders, we're going into places that we need to build trust with communities, but also that translates to the data side of things too. We're not obnoxious to, or we're not oblivious to that. And so the trouble that we often run into with disaggregating, or we have recently, is we do work in some communities that are so predominantly one demographic, or there's one dominant demographic and it's a small location. And so disaggregating actually can cause sort of bad data in a way that the margins of error are going to be really high, that you almost could be telling the wrong story about folks on the ground. So like Chris said, in those cases, it really does become important to make sure that there is a lived experience paired with the data, because otherwise things could not backfire, but the data, we know the limits of the data essentially, and we don't want to overreach that. But yeah, it's something that our data team has actually taken on as sort of a side project, is to create a guide for, our how-tos and where our limits are and how we're going to go about this continually as we work in different geographies and different scales. So it's certainly very timely.
And sometimes you just have to think about, like, what's the so what question for any of this? At what point do we know it makes a difference? And so we can often get to an answer that says, look, we can't give you an exact answer, but we know, like, you're not at this level and this is where it would make a difference. So we know it's well below that. So, this is or is not a concern. There's a question that came in about travel. Right now, we don't travel anywhere. We've had some travel, and then it's been canceled, either due to hurricanes or additional COVID concerns. The Rhode Island project, in the early period, we actually had a staff on the ground in Rhode Island. We hired somebody who was based in Newport, but we still had staff traveling there several times a year. For typical projects that we might be doing, say it's a 6-month project, we'll probably be out there once a month or once every other month. It can really depend on the nature of the project. But right now, it has pretty much all been virtual all the time. And that transition has actually worked a lot better than we would have thought going into it. It does have some implications for who gets engaged in the projects, especially when we're doing community engagement. But I got to tell you, like, the in-person meetings, and we've done a lot of different things. We did a project in Hazelwood, and we made a lot of effort to accommodate people. We had Saturday meetings, we had evening meetings, we had meetings at all different times. And we had childcare being provided at them. It was still difficult to get people engaged. We actually seen with the virtual environment, a lot of people, as Chris are right now, participate with their kids on the Zoom. It did not significantly change who participated. And in some ways, the virtual engagement, we got better participation.
That's great. I think we're kind of at the tail end. I want to take the last few minutes just to tell people about some upcoming stuff we have going on. But I had a question. Like, so much of your work is so relevant to what's happening in with regard to, you mentioned the EDA funding and other. So where can we learn more about, besides your website, and how much of the data is public? Is everything available on your website? Do you have stuff where your client wants to keep it just for them? Like, what are your thoughts on kind of being able to access some of that?
Almost all of it is publicly available data that we start with.
Right.
The one exception would be the EDA project. We got administrative data from the EDA grantees that we're not allowed to share the detailed reports. but pretty much all of our data comes from public sources. And so it's available. Not all that data is in the reports because it gets, boiled down and processed through R or spreadsheets or something else into the final numbers.
Great. We have I'll ask the last question from Jack Jacobs about much of your work is with small to mid-sized US cities. What state or local level policies have your team come across with that make your recommendations more effective when implemented? This is an interesting question. So how do you want to answer that?
My first thought on it is this is something that came up in our most recent retreat, but when there is funding allocated for programs or policies, that's the most surefire way that they would be implemented. A lot of times without pre-identification of a funding mechanism, it's really hard to suggest a program and know the appropriate scale for, or a policy and know the appropriate scale for that. So going into a project knowing that there is going to be this ARPA funding attached, or a community is about to use this for grant proposals or that sort of thing is really, really good. We have a project, and Jerry, maybe you can talk about regional cities from the past and what our current ready projects are, but those, no, I don't want to talk about those. But we've had projects in the past where, for instance, the state has said, we are going to allocate a bucket of money towards quality of place investment efforts. You as a community identify those, prioritize those, and we'll follow through with the funding. We've also had projects in the past that have said, let's look at an affordable housing or overall housing strategy for a community. But on the tail end of those projects come across, oh, well, we just don't know how palatable those types of things will be. And that leads to a feel bad moment with the client and with our team because of the great work and analysis put in. If there's not sort of that funding on the back end or that political will on the back end to implement, then it's kind of like, oh my gosh, this is a plan that may not get that to that implementation phase. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts around that.
So we try to scale our recommendations to the capacity of who's going to be implementing it. Which is that one part. Of the second part of what Chris was talking about, it comes down to the willingness and the capability of the leadership there to actually make the change and push those changes through, because they are always going to be divisive. And if people aren't willing to, make that change and to take a little bit of fire, then, and in some cases, we don't really realize until very late in the process that they just want to check the box and say they did the study. They're really not interested in making the change. And you have to have continuity of that leadership to enact it.
The flip side of that too is sometimes we've come across projects where it's uncertain where the funding may come from, or uncertain of what the size and scale of the problem is. And through our analysis, and I'm thinking of the River Life project here, the care and maintenance of the trail system in Pittsburgh that River Life is trying to undertake, is our analysis identified a scale of the problem that was entirely manageable. So then it's like, well, we don't know exactly how it's going to piece together, but we know how big of a bite we're going to take to get the ball rolling on changing this. So.
All right, this is great. We are on the last minute. We're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody, and lastly do a plug. We have a seminar series that's starting next Wednesday, the 22nd. I hope you all can join us. Let's take a round of applause for the fantastic Fourth Economy group. And Owen, thank you for being such a good little toddler. Again, all this recording will be available. All the slides will be available. And if you, there's another great comment for thanking you for your great input. And we'll make sure that your contact information is shared as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day and enjoy the weekend.